large flotilla and several passengers. People realized that this whole incident is linked to the blockade. Now, when the Security Council met, the Security Council President, which is Mexico, also expressed its deep concern and shock. The Security Council presidential statement says that the Security Council deeply regrets the loss of life and injuries resulting from the use of force during the Israeli military operation in international waters against the convoy sailing to Gaza. The Council condemns these acts and expresses its condolences to the families of the dead. And the Security Council take note of the statement of the Secretary General and the need to have a full investigation into the matter, and calls for prompt, impartial, credible, and transparent investigation conforming to international standards. So both from the Secretary General as well as from the Security Council itself, there was an immediate call for a full investigation and saying that Israel should explain its actions. Now, I'm stressing this because the stand of the Secretary General of the United Nations sort of flipped. He changed his position soon after this. At the same time, the Security Council also emphasized that the situation in Gaza was not sustainable. And the Security Council emphasized the importance of the full implementation of resolutions that the Security Council itself has issued, which has been ignored by Israel, and they mentioned all the Security Council resolutions, etc., etc. Now, what were the other responses? Israel also set up an internal inquiry, and you may have heard about it. It was headed by an Israeli judge called Turkel, so it's referred to as the Turkel Commission of Inquiry. It's an internal commission. Now, Turkey also set up a commission of inquiry. All of this took place, and the Turkey Commission completed its inquiry by the end of September. I have yet to hear about the Turkey Commission, whether it's completed it or not. So both countries involved, because Turkey, the ships belonged, at least more than one of the ships belonged to Turkey, and the 9 passengers who were killed, the 9 activists who were killed were all of Turkish origin and Turkish citizens, most of them. Turkey, of course, was an extremely interested party and set up its own commission. At the same time, the Human Rights Council in Geneva set up a 3-member panel of inquiry comprising a judge from Trinidad and Tobago, his name is Carl Hudson Phillip, and a Queen's Counsel from the United Kingdom, Sir Desmond de Silva, and myself. The Human Rights Council also met immediately on the 1st of June, and a resolution was passed that the inquiry must be set up. We started our work on the 8th of August. It took some time to constitute the members of the panel, although they were only 3, because the names had to be circulated to certain governments: Israel, Turkey, United Kingdom, the United States, and Switzerland, and a few others had to review the names and approve them. So some of the names that had been mentioned or listed or nominated were rejected by some of the countries because they didn't have confidence in their impartiality or objectivity, and therefore it took 2 months, the whole of June and the whole of July, to constitute this 3-member panel. But the panel started its work on the 8th of August and concluded its work and presented its report to the Human Rights Council at the 15th session of the Human Rights Council on the 27th of September. Now, I will go into now the conclusions that we arrived at, that this panel arrived at. First of all, of the 700 passengers, there were 32 different nationalities within these 700 passengers. The panel interviewed very intensive interviews of about 112 of the passengers, comprising 20 nationalities out of the 32. The mission attached great importance to getting eyewitness accounts. Also, we wanted to get eyewitness accounts from the Israeli armed forces and the commandos that conducted the raid. But the Israeli government refused to give any kind of cooperation with this panel. They condemned the Human Rights Council for setting up this panel. They said that the council was a very biased organization and that the council had consistently picked on Israel for violations of human rights and it had ignored human rights violations by other countries around the world, and therefore they said it had no confidence in the council, and by extension it had no confidence in the panel set up by the council, and they said they will not cooperate. In fact, the exact words used by the ambassador in Geneva was that this mission was superfluous and unnecessary. Those were the words that they used. Now, we also knew that by this time, now this is the point I want to make, while the Secretary General of the UN had stated that Israel should give an explanation, that there should be a full investigation of the events, what he did, even as the Human Rights Council had set up that investigation, was that he set up a parallel panel, and you might be aware of that. He set up a parallel panel of inquiry headed by the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, David Palmer, and the mandate of that panel was not to conduct a full investigation. Now, what I am quite clear about is that the Secretary General's action was not pursuant to anything that transpired in the Security Council. The Security Council did say, they echoed the concern of the Secretary General and said there should be an investigation, but the mandate given to this panel of inquiry, in my view, is not pursuant to the decisions of the Security Council, because the mandate was merely to review the Israeli Commission's report and the Turkey government's report, and to come up with suggestions on how to restore good relationship between Israel and Turkey, because as a result of the attack, Turkey had broken off diplomatic relations with Israel. In fact, Turkey is about the only Muslim country that had a relationship with Israel up till this point, of course. And so the Secretary General's panel was not doing any independent fact finding. It was not to interview passengers or do any kind of investigation. It was only to see how to improve relationship between Turkey and Israel, and to review Turkey's commission report and the Israeli report. So it had nothing to do with an investigation. The Secretary General completely turned around on the views he had as soon as he heard about the raid. Now, our conclusions were that, first of all, no arms or weapons of an offensive nature were taken on board by any of the passengers or were to be found in any of the vessels. Now, this is an important finding, because Israel said that the attack and the violence that they used, and even the killings, was necessary violence, because it was done in self-defense, that the passengers had posed a threat to the commandos who came on board, and therefore they had to kill to defend themselves. Now, the point is that while it is true that on the Mavi Marmara, a small group of passengers did use a certain level of violence, They used broomsticks, mops, the mop handles. They did cut some of the ship's railings, and so they had metal rods. They had knives. That was because the Mavi Marmara, carrying 500 passengers, had 6 kitchens, and the knives were taken from the kitchen. The point we made was that these weapons were improvised weapons. There was no bad intention with regard to the whole flotilla. Nobody came on board with weapons already predetermining that they will use violence. It was a reaction and a response to the threat posed by the commandos boarding the ship. They knew the commanders were going to board because from 10 o'clock that night, they were surrounded by 2 warships, 2 submarines, and 30 Zodiac boats. For those of you who may not know what Zodiac boats are, they are like rubber dinghies but very fast, and they carry about 15 to 16 commandos on them. And these Zodiac, there were 30 of them, and they had surrounded the ships. And they were being, the Israeli commandos were talking to the ships, advising them to turn around and threatening them and saying that they would use any means to stop them. And therefore they knew they were going to be attacked. So by 12 o'clock that night, all satellite communication was cut off by these. They jammed it. Up till that point, passengers were sending telephone messages. They were sending little video clippings back home. But by 12, everything had been cut off, and they were completely isolated on the high seas. But so the passengers armed themselves. At that moment, they armed themselves. So we said that it's the passengers who are acting in self-defense rather than the Israelis. Now, okay, the mission also found, and now the next point is that the commanders could, since they could not get on to the ship from the sides, from the Zodiac boats, because from the Zodiac boats they attempted to throw grappling irons onto the ship and try to climb up into the ship at the side, but passengers were repelling them with water hoses, with sticks, throwing chairs from the ship at the boats and so on. Then the helicopters came, and from the helicopters, soldiers started to descend onto the top deck. This 10 to 15 passengers who were armed with sticks, etc., captured the first 3 soldiers who came down, and they attacked them. They beat the soldiers. One of them even had a knife wound. So that is a fact. Now, however, what they did when they caught them, although they did attack them, was to disarm them. They took away all their weapons and they threw those guns, etc., into the sea. But what we found had happened at the same time was the helicopters which were hovering above and sending the soldiers down was at the same time using both lethal and non-lethal ammunition and firing onto the deck. So there was the non-lethal ammunition was by way of plastic bullets, 10 grenades which cause a big sound, but also there was live ammunition and firing, and it is this which caused several of the deaths. What we also discovered was that the firing was particularly aimed at anybody who had a camera, because they did not want any evidence of what they were going to do. From all the interviews we conducted, our conclusion is that the Israeli intention was to really kill. They wanted to do as much physical injury as possible because they were embarrassed by the number of attempts to break the blockade. So many from the year 2006. there have been, for the past 3 or 4 years, there have been attempts by activists to break the blockade. And this was causing a lot of adverse publicity for Israel, and they had decided that they're going to stop